G'day, Ben from Duck Playing Chicken here with a new build series. Back to the Macross universe, and this is the second kit that I'll be building in this series of the Macross Factory series. This is the Armored Valkyrie version. I previously built the VF-1S, I believe it was. Yes. So these kits are great. They're like small dioramas in a box, and they're really quite small and provide a lot of detail for what you get. So this is the Armored Valkyrie kit, and these model kits are by Arii, and you know, they were released under the Robotech line. I can't remember whether it was Revell or whoever released it, but basically they had different box art. They had a photograph of the made model, but I remember having one of those as a kid, thinking it was the most awesome thing ever. So this one I'm really looking forward to building. Let's have a look at what's in the box. Okay, we get the instructions, which I'll have a look at in a minute. We get a white sprue, which is all bits for the Armored Valkyrie by the look of it. In fact, I think that's all that's on that particular sprue. So, and what's the... got a year on this? I don't know what year this kit came out. It would have been the 80s, but this is a repop, so this is not like an original 1980s version of the kit. But usual affair, you know, reasonable amount of detail for a kit of its time. We get two sprues in this particular colour. So this forms the base and the back of the, I guess, the hanger. We've got some details for a crane, for a cart that carries the missiles. We can see the missiles here. We've got a door for the hanger floor compartment. So that all looks pretty good. Looks like this trailer thing comes with a hook to be towed, I guess. So that's kind of interesting. Now I've noticed that there's a little piece here, and one's broken off, which thankfully, you know, it was in a bag, so I haven't lost it, which is good. So there's that sprue, and then we have this sprue here, which is, I think it's common across all of these kits, where it's basically the girders and so some of the structural parts for the hanger, and of course you get three figures which look identical to the ones that I've got in the previous kit. So I suspect this sprue is probably shared across all four kits in the series, and then the other two sprues are what vary. Let's have a look at the instructions, and I think I've got the decals in here as well. Yes. So these kits do come with water slide decals, and if you watched my previous video, you will notice that I had all sorts of dramas with these decals. So I've actually printed up some of my own. The problem ones are probably going to be the ones with the white background, the UN Spacey logos with the white background. I'm not sure what I'm going to do there, but we'll see. So I'm hoping these ones aren't as bad as the previous ones I looked at, because the previous ones were rubbish. So I had all sorts of problems with those. Hopefully these ones are okay. You get two sets of water slide decals. So one is specifically for the Valkyrie itself, and the other one is sort of, I guess they leave it up to you where you want to put them in the context of the hanger. So it is good that they provided those. Okay, so the instructions, again, it's a product of its time. They show all the parts. The colour callouts are sort of where they've actually shown it painted on the sprue, which is kind of quaint these days. So, you know, these were designed obviously for kids, so, you know, any way to make it easy as possible. On the back, you get a nice photo of the painted kit. And so this is the one I've built previously. I do have all four of them, so I will eventually get around to building all of them. But yeah, you can see, you know, it looks quite you know, it looks really good for something of this price and of this size. Okay, so the instructions. You start off by the first 3 steps are basically putting the Armored Valkyrie together. Now I can see straight away that the way the limbs are sort of embedded in the body and stuff is going to be a bit of a problem, because I want to keep all the limbs separate to make it easier for masking and painting, so I'll have to address that. We've got the base, the hanger girders, we've got the crane device and the missile trailer, and then it sort of shows what it looks like if you were to stack a whole lot of them together. Now I've only got 4 of them, so I'll be stacking them side by side. Of course, as with the previous kit, I will be lighting this one, so I'll be using sort of a similar lighting style. But the next step for me is to start taking parts off the sprue and working out how I'm going to be able to sort of keep a lot of these bits separate on the Valkyrie to make it easier for painting. I started working on the Armored Valkyrie figure, and I just want to show you a couple of modifications I'm going to make in order to make it just a bit easier to paint. If we look at the torso side of it, and just on the left hand side, you can sort of see how the joints, how they work. So basically they're captured within the 2 parts of the torso for both the legs and the arms as well. Now the problem with that is that one is it's harder to sort of deal with a lot of the seams in the torso once this is all sealed up and all those limbs are in place. So what I've done is I've gone down the path of what I've done over here, which is I've taken a bit of styrene plastic, this is just solid sort of beam stock, and just created a little bit of extra meat for the joint to go into, and I've used a 3mm drill bit just to drill that hole out. Now what that means is that I can cut off the I guess what you would call a plate. So this bit here, what I've done is I've trimmed it so it's just a straight sort of peg, and now I can sort of plug that in and it holds there just fine. It usually holds there just fine. It works better when I've actually got this all clamped in place. So we'll put the torso together. Yeah, so it sits there, it holds its position just fine, and it means that I can deal with all the seams in the torso and keep this all separate. The previous kit I did in this series, I used magnets, and I could go down that path for this one, but I don't think there's any real need to. I'll try and keep it simple if I can. Now, just a bit of sort of general information about what I'm finding with this kit so far. I'm still sort of in the infancy of just putting it all together, but of course it is a repop of a very old kit, so the moulding is not great. Let me try and find some examples for you, some pretty rough areas. So there's these tiny little marks which are obviously in the mould. So you can see this little bit here. There's also one in the other arm which almost looks like someone slipped with a knife or something, but that was actually in there, so I'm going to have to of course putty all that up. But yeah, there's some imperfections in the moulds. There's sort of some fairly rough bits that it's just a matter of sort of a bit of sanding. It's nothing major. All these bits go in 2 halves, so you will be dealing with a lot of seams, and you can sort of see how tragic that seam is. So it's going to require a lot of work, but it's kind of one thing that I find really therapeutic with these old kits is sort of trying to clean it up. So I've sort of started the clean up on this one. Got to rescribe some lines and clean up some stuff where the glue has oozed out, but it'll just take a little bit of time. But just so that you're aware, all these bits are basically made up of 2 halves. Now, so I'm going to trim these little discs back and sort of set up this method for both the arms and the legs. Now the legs are actually made up of a number of pieces. So there's there's this piece here, and this sort of clamps into the two halves of the lower leg. I should get the correct side in. I think that's the correct side. Doesn't really matter. But anyway, normally this would, these two bits of the lower leg would clamp around this bit, keeping it all as one piece. Now I kind of figure because it is just holding it in place, it doesn't actually swivel at that point. What I've done is just trim back that disc, and so now it'll slide into place. It doesn't really matter if it's the wrong leg or not, but so you can sort of see that it just now slides in there, and I'll have to glue it. But it means that I can paint these two pieces separately. I can do all the masking and everything, and then I can just glue this in place. There's no articulation at the knee. It's just sort of the whole leg at the hip. That's the only part of it that sort of rotates. So yeah, it was kind of interesting how they've developed that to sort of clamp into the lower leg, but you know, it's not. Yeah. It's not really important to do it that way. We can just glue it in. So there's that. The head is again comes with a little disc sort of bit that clamps in with the two halves of the torso. I've taken that disc off, so now it just slots in the top of the torso. But yeah, the head sits in there and it doesn't fall out. It just sort of friction fits just fine. So that's sort of the work I'm doing on the main body. For the backpack, there's these two little fill-in pieces for the back here. So this is going to require some putty. It doesn't actually fill it properly. Not that you're really going to see it, but and the pegs are maybe a bit long, so you can sort of see. It's maybe a bit hard to see, but yeah, it actually sticks out. It doesn't sit flush. So what I'm going to do, I think, is just trim the peg. Let's see how this is going to work. Try and locate it in there, see if we can get it sort of flush with the, yeah, sort of marginally better. So anyway, once I've got that in place, I can just run some glue over it. And then these little bits in here, I'll just use some Tamiya putty to sort of fill those gaps. And so I can sand it all in place. So I'll go ahead and finish this off camera, and yeah, once I've sort of got the joint part sorted, I'll come back and show you some different techniques for the way I clean these pieces up. This being an older kit, of course, it has some pretty serious seams to deal with. So we have a look on the arm here. We can see, you know, I've glued these together, and yeah, there's a big seam. There's a bit of a step there. I've also used Mr. Surfacer 500 to seal some of these smaller gaps. And so I just want to talk about the tools that I use for sanding parts like this that are a little bit, you know, they've got all sorts of different shapes and stuff to deal with. So one of the most used tools I have is a sanding stick. So this one's reasonably coarse. I think it's about 240 or 300 grit. So it's reasonably coarse, but if you can get sort of sanding sticks, even if you make your own just with a coffee stir and sticky tape some sandpaper down to it, that, you know, it does the same thing. Especially when you're talking about a kit like this that has predominantly flat surfaces. If you are going over a curve, you're probably better off just using the sandpaper by itself. So this basically is the chainsaw. It'll get rid of most of the, you know, major sort of seams that you have. And quite often working with white plastic can be a little bit problematic, just because it can be a bit more difficult to sort of see whether you've actually sanded down the seam or not. So in that case, like if you have a look, you can sort of see, I'm definitely a long way off getting that seam down, but you can see that shine. So you can see that shiny area there, the low spots, they're the bits that I haven't actually addressed. So the other thing that you can do is take something like a Gundam marker, So something like this. It doesn't have to be a Gundam marker. It could be just sort of any felt tip sort of marker, like a Sharpie or something. What you can do is sort of colour in the areas along the seam. And as you're sanding, of course, that will disappear, and it'll give you an indication of what bits you've missed and what bits you haven't. So I'm just going to let that dry a little bit, and I can sort of start working on some of these other areas. The other thing that's really good to have is just a brush, just an old sort of fairly coarse bristle brush. Toothbrush will do the same thing, just to clear out all the sanding dust once you've sort of, you know, done a little bit of sanding. And especially in sort of things like the panel lines, you know, you want to get all the dust out of there. So just sort of working around, getting a bit of a rough sand done. And these pieces, they'll all get a grey primer coat once I've done the first round of sanding, because it's always a lot easier to see where there's any issues, you know, further cleanup that's required. The other thing is, you know, you want to clean your sanding stick. Now I've got like essentially an apron on that I just wipe across the, you know, across the apron, and that sort of gets rid of a lot of the stuff out of the sanding sticks. Okay, so this should be dry enough. But you can see as I'm sanding, it's a lot easier to see where the low spots are now that I've got that sort of marker in there. So just keep sanding. Try to keep the sanding stick as flat as possible to the surface. And what you're aiming for is for basically all that black to disappear. Now, if the seams are really deep, you might want to use some putty. But I think looking at this way, you may have to use a little bit of putty, I think. So you can see it's getting flatter and flatter, but I can still see that there's areas there that are pretty deep. The other thing that's happening is, of course, we're losing the detail of the panel lines. So I don't want to go too deep, or otherwise lose them altogether. Now I will be rescribing the panel lines, so just to show you, I use this tool here, which I think makes, this is a FlexiFile one, but I know Tamiya make you know, rescribing tool. Essentially, it's just a blade. It's just a sharp blade with a hook part that you can drag. So what I find with this type of scriber is I can actually just run the blade to get it started, and you don't want to apply too much pressure, otherwise if you go off track you'll end up completely ruining your panel line. And then I'm just gently scraping that panel line out. So I'm going to come out of focus, you can sort of just see that. But so I've got to go along and do all of those. Okay, so I've still got a lot of work to do on those, and they are time consuming. You just got to be patient with it. So some other things, some other tools that I use for sanding are these, which are basically sandpaper on the back of styrene sheet. Now you can make your own. I bought these. These are, you know, I can't remember who makes them, but basically it's just a mounted bit of sandpaper to, yeah, bit of styrene stock there. And what this does is it allows you to get in sort of tight places. So, you know, when you're talking about the back of the arm bit here, you can sort of get a sanding stick in there and just give it a few scrapes. Now it's hardly seen, so I'm not too sort of fussed about that area, but it's sort of it's just another tool that I use. And if you want to get in really tight areas, you just, you know, fold over a bit of sandpaper and get it in there, and, just muscle it in there a bit, and then back and forth, back and forth. Again, these are areas that you're not going to see that much of, so it's really just so that you don't catch any kind of obvious line when the light's on it. So there's that. The other thing that is probably up there with the sanding stick is a sharp blade, and you can actually take out a lot of seam lines in tighter areas just by scraping. So what you're doing is using the blade flat along the surface and just gently scraping the plastic away. Now sometimes there's advantages using a blade over a sanding stick, and a lot of it has to do with sort of getting into tight areas without sort of losing detail. So you can just keep scraping until that sort of seam disappears. Okay, so you can see on that hand that's sort of nice and nice and smooth now. However, that it's not really a panel line, I guess, but a line that sort of delineates the hand. I can use my knife to go in there and just sort of cut out almost like a V shape. So this is a little bit different to rescribing, just because I'm trying to get rid of the build up of glue that has formed in that crevice. And then I can sort of scrape along with the point here, because I tend to find like across these sort of panel line or these areas, it's really obvious when you've got two halves that have been stuck together. So you can sort of start to clean that up, and you can see that already start to look better. So that's another reason why you would use a knife over a sanding stick. You can use a knife sort of on big flat surfaces, but you just want to try and keep the knife as flat as possible. Alright, so I've got a lot of work to do sort of cleaning up the other pieces. I have cleaned up a couple of them. Let's see. Yeah, if we have a look at this one, I've had to rescribe that line there. This is part of the upper leg, and these areas in here are really tricky. So these are like these cylindrical bits. So I've used a combination of sandpaper and my craft knife to get in those gaps there. But if we have a look at, yeah, I mean, we've got some big areas to sort of clean up on this one. Alright, I've done some work on the lower legs as well, so you can see these dark areas here are actually the Mr. Surfacer 500. So I've just let that dry for a good day or so, and then sand over it. So you can see there's a couple of sort of little gaps. I've got to say the gaps in this kit aren't too bad. There was a bit of a step, but the gaps sort of between, finally gluing these two pieces together was okay. Alright, I want to talk about a couple of other things that I've sort of done. So the interior of the body, I've kind of changed my idea a little bit, just about getting the arms connected and the legs connected. So if you remember, I spoke about cutting off the little disc that goes on the end of here. But what I found is the joint still sort of moves around a little bit. So what I want to do is actually cut the peg off, and I'm going to use some 3mm diameter styrene tube, and that will make the basis of the pivot point, if you like. So for example, this is the upper leg, and I've just drilled out that hole, and the styrene tube goes in that end, and then I can sort of cut that off. So let's have a test of that. So I've just cut off a small amount of this tube, put it in the upper leg there, and then so I've added all this sort of styrene here, and then just used a 3mm drill bit to drill it out. And if I stick that in there, I've got a lot better, a lot better holding joint there now. So it's a lot better to pose, and it's not as unstable as just having the peg with the little disc thing cut out. So I'm a lot happier with that. And I may end up just putting a bit of tube sort of all the way through, and then the legs can sort of stick on like that. So that's what I've done for the torso. I'm not going to worry about the head just because it actually sits in that hole pretty well. It was just mainly the arms and the legs that were a bit of an issue. Now for the backpack, I think before I seal this up, I may use a magnet in here. I'm not entirely sure. And the reason I'm not sure is because I'm still puttying up everything on the backpack. So you can see I've used a combination of things to fill a lot of the holes in here. So where you can see like this plastic card here and this putty and these bits which actually came with the kit, they're all hollow. So there's not a lot of it you see once the backpack is on the figure, but you do see a little bit of it. So I thought it was worth just filling all that. So for these edge bits, that's just 0.25mm thick styrene. And now what I can do is I can go in and just follow the contour of the shape here and cut it flush. And maybe give that a little bit of a sand. This last little bit on the edge here. Okay, so I'm seeing this. Now we've got a nice sort of clean edge there. Now the rest of the stuff I've got to sand back, so for that I'm just going to use my sander again. Hopefully when I get this sanded properly you'll be able to see the areas where it was hollow. So you get a better idea of the hollow gap that was in there. Now for this, what I did was I filled these gaps with a bit of styrene, just a few little scraps, just so that I wasn't filling it completely with putty, just to, because styrene's a bit cheaper than the old putty. And I've just used the Tamiya basic type, I think it was, which one? This one, the orange cap. Yeah, so this is the grey putty. And once I've sort of sanded that down, I'll probably use the fine putty or maybe even Mr. Surfacer 500 just to fill in those last sort of little gaps. Now I also have to fill in some gaps on the edges here. So I'll do that with, again, with the Mr. Surfacer 500. But eventually what I'll end up with is something where you won't see the sort of gaps in the torso. If I show this loosely on the back, you can sort of see that this area here, would have shown through as a sort of empty gap. Even a little bit of where you see the filler there. So it's really just sort of tidying up those areas so there's no sort of hollow parts showing once the backpack's in place. Alright, so still lots of work. Hopefully next time I'll show it sort of complete and all sanded down, ready for a primer coat, then we can start on the base. I finished up the Armored Valkyrie and I'm pretty happy with the mods that I've made for the limbs. They seem to be quite secure. The only bits that aren't are these sort of lower legs, just because they're literally these little pegs here. So once I've sort of got these upper leg parts painted, I'll be gluing these in place to the bottom parts. So it's just going to make it a bit easier to paint, that's all. I've got to say the cleanup worked reasonably well. Of course I won't know for sure until I prime it all in grey. If I start with the arms and take those off, the pegs that I put in place, you can see they're quite you know, quite secure and really easy to pose, and at least now I can have the arms sort of separated, ready for painting. A couple of things to note is there was a mark on this arm here. You can sort of see this crescent here. I don't know whether it was a gash that sort of happened in the kit that I did or whether it was in the molds. I mean, there's some pretty rough areas on the molds, but had to clean that up. There's also some sort of sink marks in places, and so I've had to use, you know, a bit of putty here and there and quite a bit of sanding. So that's that one. The other one, you know, more of the sort of same. Now for these middle bits here, there's these indents on the sides here, and what I did was I rescribed them, and I rescribed them right across, but of course they're not supposed to go right across, so I just used putty. I used a bit of tape, I think it was sort of 2mm tape on each side, and then I sort of puttied down the middle, so that way it was sort of consistent. It's a little bit rough, but it's still better than what it was. So I'm just sort of checking the pieces. There's a few spots that I suspect that once I get primer on, I'll probably need to fix. Now we've got these lower leg sections. They cleaned up pretty well. There was pretty minimal putty work in those. Yeah. But still, there isn't. I think the only... No, actually, I think every single piece got puttied, including the head, which is one piece. It had this sort of sinkhole in the back of the head, so I'm not sure what that's about. I'll try to fill that with putty. I might have to give that another shot. So yeah, all these bits had to be puttied up. Now for the backpack, I think I mentioned earlier I was going to put a magnet in. I don't think I need to. I think there's no reason why I want to take the backpack off. So what I'll end up doing is gluing it in place. It seems to hold pretty well without glue. You know, it's not going to come off in a hurry. So, but I'll probably end up just super gluing it once I've got it all painted. You can see all the putty work I did on the back there, filling all those holes, and that's really so they're not seen. You know, more specifically these ones down here. I probably went a bit overboard with this, probably didn't need to fill all that, but anyway. There are some sink marks on the sides of here that had to be filled, so and they were on both sides. And of course the torso, you know, required quite a bit of seam work. It's sort of pretty rough in places, a bit of stepping, that sort of thing. But anyway, that's all cleaned up now. And so, yeah, the Valkyrie is essentially ready to go, so ready for priming anyway. Okay, moving on to the base. This is a different base than the previous one I did. It is a different layout, different design. It's got a different number on it, and the backing is different too. So the previous one I did had sort of TV screens on it. This one has a set of shelves. Now I think I need to put something in these shelves. I think, and if we have a look at, where is it, the illustration? If you have a look at the illustration, they sort of show, you know, stacks of things in the shelf. So I think that's something I might end up doing. Just add a few greeblies in there and detail that up a little bit more. No TV screens on this one, so I won't be doing sort of any custom decals or anything for that. There was a little bit of a scratch up here that I had to sort of sand out, but essentially the back sort of fits on there. It's a bit loose. It will need glue, so have that. Most of the what would you call it, superstructure is the same as the previous one I did. So you've got the back, and then you've got these struts here, which I'm not going to hold in place, unfortunately. You've sort of got two of those. Actually, that one goes there, and that one goes there, and then you've got sort of these cross members that go across the top. Now, these things on the previous one I did, I put lighting in, so I'll be doing the same for this one. But I've sort of started, you know, looking at the pieces, doing some inspections and stuff. And there are a lot of ejector pin marks on these pieces for the base. So this is the panel, the lid that goes in here, and I won't be putting it in just yet because I am conscious that these little pins get a bit weak after they've been sort of put in place a couple of times. But yeah, the bottom of this is kind of full of ejector pin marks. There's ejector pin marks. This is the bottom of the walkway, and this is one of the, I'm not sure what it is, it's like this I don't know, I wouldn't call it a crane, it's like these two tanks that sort of go on this girder and they are supposed to, I guess, slide across a bit. So there were some ejector pin marks in there. I'll put some Mr. Surfacer 500 in there to clean those up. I put the little cart together. There were some gaps on the sides here that I filled, and so these this buggy comes with the wheels are separate. You have to stick them on the axle, and so they just go in like that. They sort of freely spin, but the wheels are they're a bit stiff, and the holes for the wheels were a little bit bigger than what the axles were, so you kind of had to get the glue in there, line it up, and hope for the best. And then it has this tow bar on it, and that holds a couple of missiles. So for the missiles, these are two pieces. Well, yeah, they're two pieces. I've had to do a lot of sanding. There was a horrible mold line down the middle of some of these, but essentially these two parts, you've got this bit that sort of goes on the end here. I'm considering maybe gluing these before I paint. They are in a couple of different colours, so yeah, I think I might have to glue them before I paint. I don't know, I haven't worked that out yet. But anyway, it comes with 3 missiles, and they sort of sit on the trailer here. And they'll sort of sit like something like that. It's not going to hold together, but you get the idea. So yeah, it comes with some nice little details of this kit, and it also comes with a stairway, which the other one didn't. But yeah, some nice little sort of details to add to the kit. The figures, I need to sort of clean them up. They've got quite a bit of flash on them, so I need a bit of work. Essentially, the first step is to tidy all these up, clean these up, and then start looking at the detailing and lighting of the base. So I think first of all, you can sort of see when you use Mr. Surfacer, sometimes it takes several applications. You can sort of see the, if it'll focus, see the divots in there. So this stuff does shrink when it dries, so you just got to be aware of that. Alright, and sanding this stuff is pretty straightforward. I've got the same sanding tools I use for everything else. This is just sandpaper on the back of sort of some styrene sheet, and I've sort of cut this so that it'll fit within this groove to sort of clean up the putty that I've done in here. And it's just time consuming, I mean, I don't mind doing it. I actually really enjoy the building side of kits. I mean, painting, you get that satisfaction of it being completed and looking great, but I actually really like the building and prep work that sort of goes into kits. And some of these other areas are probably going to be a bit easier to clean up. I should say this thing is made up of 2 halves, so there's sort of seam to deal with down there, and then these 2 end caps sort of stick on separately. But yeah, there was a little bit of work to deal with that seam. Alright, on to more sanding. Okay, I've cleaned up all the parts on the base and sort of just stuck it together loosely with some blue tack so you can get an idea what it looks like. It is a little bit tricky just the way I've got the camera sort of set up to give you an idea, but you can sort of see, you know, you've got the staircase there, you've got the walkway, you've got this crane thing where this, whatever this is, sort of slides on this girder here. The other thing is that this whole piece has wheels on it that sort of, I guess, is supposed to slide across in the track. So I've sort of just stuck it with masking tape and stuff, so it's not rolling particularly well, but it'll be interesting to see how well that works once it's made. So there's this one has actually gone together somewhat easier than the last one I did. I think the fact that it hasn't got the little control box with the lights that I have to worry about and all that sort of thing, so this one was a lot more straightforward. I will be putting some greeblies in the shelves just to sort of fill that out, add a bit more detail there, but the rest of it is pretty good. So if I pull this out and I'll show you some of the, I guess, gimmicks of this kit. So yeah, this girder here, you've got this sort of, I don't know what it's supposed to be. It doesn't really sort of look like a crane or anything. It's just sort of a couple of tanks on the girder. So it sort of slides along this girder, and you can take this piece off, and that's sort of how it slides in there. So these little bits that hang on the end, I'll take these bits of tape off so you can sort of see what's going on. I can do this without the wheels coming off, but they are wheels that sort of turn on an axle. So they're not, I don't envisage that they're supposed to be glued in, so they do turn, and that's on both ends so that it can roll along the track. That sort of is these two bits here and this front piece here. So it's a nice little, nice little gimmick. The other thing is, if I take the top off, so I might disassemble most of this so you can see what's going on. A couple of things, I did have to drill out the holes just a little bit on these pieces in here, just because they're a little bit tight. So these pieces here, just used a 1mm drill bit just to drill them out a little bit more, just so that these little pins here would go through the holes okay. Take this back off. And you can sort of see that the gangway does have that sort of hole in it for where the staircase goes up through it. Staircase seems to fit okay. Typical sort of, work health safety standards of the future, no guardrails on the staircase. It'd be pretty steep staircase given the scale of the figures in this kit. So always funny to look at that sort of thing. Some of the details of this backing are sort of identical to the other one. So it's sort of like this little area down here was kind of the only bit they changed, because all this detail up here is sort of the same. So sort of like the bottom section, they they changed the molds for the different kits. Now for the bottom trapdoor, I guess. So that just flips open. You can see I've done some sort of cleaning up on that. Now if I try to take this out, I want to be really careful with this. So one thing that I had to do was just grind out these holes a little bit more, just because the trapdoor didn't sort of sit properly. It was sort of the holes that were given, it was almost sitting a little bit proud at the front there. So I've just sort of ground them out a little bit. It also makes it a bit easier to remove the trapdoor. For the cart, which I think I've already shown, I've done all the clean-up work of the putty that I did, and you've got these 3 missiles that sort of sit on the rack on the trailer. And you know, based on the illustration on the box, you can also sort of store them in here. So similar to what I did on the previous kit I did in this series, I'm going to make up some sort of rack that goes in here so that the missiles can sort of sit nicely in there as opposed to just being dropped in. I will add a little bit of detail in here. Also add a little bit of detail on the trapdoor here. So that's where I'm at. I'm going to leave the video there. The next video will sort of be about the electronics and yeah, some of the sort of detailing up bits I'm going to do on the kit. So until the next video, I'll catch you later.